And she said, I thought it through. Things were going downhill. And I told my psychologist, I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to give up. And my psychologist said, you know, when you mentioned this, I think maybe we've uncovered really what the problem is. And maybe we can work on it. And maybe this is what we've been looking for after all. Maybe we found the answer to why is the person like this. And she said, you know, I thought it might be possible, so I decided to give it a shot. And 1 week later, I was pregnant. After she said this, I asked her, well, let's imagine that you have the answer to why. What would it change? She said, actually, it wouldn't change anything. You're right, it would not change anything. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'd like to share with you a story of somebody who was very close to leaving a narcissist. I'm going to break this video down into 2 parts. The first part is simply telling you a story, and the second part is using the filter that I use with my clients to identify certain dynamics and certain ways of thinking that lead us to sometimes enter or stay in toxic situations. So I met up with this friend who had just had a baby, and we went for a walk, and I asked her how the relationship was going with her husband. And she looked really sad and said, well, it's the same as before. If anything, it's gotten worse since we had the baby. I asked her and I said, you know, it seemed to me that after your marriage, when you began to see these toxic traits, toxic behaviors, it seemed to me that you were ready to leave, or getting ready to leave. So what happened? What changed? Now for a bit of context. She actually got married roughly around the same time as one very toxic relationship I had ended. And we were in touch when I was going through the discard phase and trying to understand what had happened, but with no knowledge of toxicity and narcissism and so on. And at one point, I started talking about symptomatic behaviors that I'd seen. There's a whole story behind that. I'll tell you about it another time. And she was talking about her relationship and her marriage. Of course, I'd assumed that they just got married, things should be great, but things were very far from great. And when I described the behaviors, she was saying, well, this is crazy. It echoes the way my husband is acting in terms of mood swings, in terms of putting the person down, in terms of unnecessarily negative and critical comments. And there was a whole list of really toxic behaviors there. So it was interesting to see that her situation echoed my situation, apart from I was in the discard phase. I'd already been discarded, and she was still married to this person. And she even said that she'd had prior toxic relationships or prior relationships with narcissists, so she knew about it, she knew what it was, and she was actually seeing a recurring pattern. And of course, being friends, you ask, well, why do you stay with a person if you see that it's not working out for you? And she said, you know, I'm, however old she was, 36, 37, you know, I want to have children. And if I leave this person, I'm not sure if I'm going to have children. I'm not sure I'm going to find someone else. So when she described how toxic it was, but also explained her fear of not having children, came up the question, of course, of, well, how do you see this working out if you do have children with someone who's already being difficult and toxic now? Because generally having children doesn't make things easier and doesn't radically change people. Sometimes it does, generally it doesn't. Fast forward 1 year, she has this baby, which was really surprising for me to hear of because I assumed that she was going to leave this person. And we go for a walk, and the baby's lovely and wonderful, and it's great to see her as a mum. And so I ask, well, how is your relationship going these days? You know, have things improved? And she says, well, no, things are just terrible still. If anything, they're worse than before. And there's more anger, there's more tension. And so I ask her, well, there's something I don't understand. It seemed to me that you were on the way out. It seemed to me that we'd uncovered and understood the dynamics, and it seemed to me that your conclusion was having a child with someone like this is going to be a nightmare, and I don't want it for myself, and I don't want it for my child. And I understood the fear of not having children, but I was just surprised. And she said, you know, I thought it through. Things were going downhill for about 4 months, 5 months, and I had a session with my psychologist. And I told my psychologist, you know, I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to give up. Because they'd spent a lot of time talking about the relationship, of course, and trying to understand. And so we spoke. This is what she told me. We spoke during the session, and my psychologist said, when you mentioned this, I think maybe we've uncovered really what the problem is. And maybe we can work on it. And maybe this is what we've been looking for after all. Maybe we found the answer to why is the person like this. And she said, I thought it might be possible, so I decided to give it a shot, and 1 week later I was pregnant. And of course, walking away from a situation with a child or a situation without children is radically different. And so after she said this, I asked her, well, let's imagine that you have the answer to why. What would it change? And she thought about it, and she was taken aback a bit, and she said, actually, it wouldn't change anything. You're right, it would not change anything. Knowing why doesn't change the behavior. It might change how we can work on it. And then I just asked her, well, what makes you think that the situation isn't working out perfectly for your husband? She goes, well, he's making me upset. Well, is he acting like someone who doesn't want to make you upset? She goes, no, it seems like he's more going out of the way in order to make me upset. Well, there you go. Looking for the answer to the question why is often not helpful, because also we can have a hypothesis, but I think it's important with a hypothesis to think, if I get the hypothesis right, what does it change? And how can I know if it's right? And if I don't get it right, what does it change? Trying to understand how people function in their head is just hypotheses. It's projection, often it's hallucination, and it's often us looking for some form of logic so we can predict what's going to happen. But this is the crazy thing. People tell us exactly how they are. They show us how they behave. They show us the way they treat other people. When we see a discrepancy between the behavior on the one hand and the words on the other hand, we've got the choice of which one to believe. This is often what's so gaslighting, as we say, well, the person says these words, but they do something else. They say they want to lose weight, but they're drinking soda. Well, what makes us believe that people tell the truth? Paul Ekman writes about this, and he says very rightly, the question isn't if someone is lying, the question is when are they lying? Seeing things this way radically changes the behavior. So now that I've shared the story with you, let's deconstruct it a bit.